So, you play Genshin Impact. What's it about? I've been waiting my whole life for this moment. Okay, settle in. So you got these two siblings. They can jump from world to world. They're in this world called Teyvat. They're getting ready to jump to the next one. Then this chick shows up with this angry square and is like, irrigation of mankind, you're not going nowhere. Traps one of the siblings. It changes. Basically, you have a main character sibling and a trap sibling. You can pick which one you want to be the main character, but main character, trap sibling. So the one sibling gets trapped. Main character sibling is like, yo, give me back my sibling. Chick with the angry square is like, nah. And then, so, you know, the abilities that you have to jump through the world and you can also fly. Yeah, those are gone now. So then obviously that was so traumatic. Your trap sibling is gone forever. So then you're like, oh no, I need to take a nap for like a couple hundreds of years. So your main character wakes up and is like, yo, it's been a couple hundreds of years. I should probably go and find my trapped siblings, see what happened to them. So then you fish this fairy out of a lake. Don't ask any questions as to how they got in the lake, what their backstory is, how they know where they're going. You're just like, hey, guide me. And the fairy's like, cool, got you. The First Nation is like close to here. We'll go ask some questions about your sibling. Because Teyvat turns out has like 7 nations. Each nation is ruled by a god. Each god has an element, right? So there's like Animo, Geo, Electro, Hydro, bunch of different elements. And then the gods, see, they can like use these elements. And then like the plebes, the people that the gods rule over, they can also use these elements. But in order to use it, they need this little medal called a vision. And the gods are basically like, you're worthy, I'll let you use my power. Because see, like back in the day before the gods, the dragons ruled over this land. And then the primordial one, the one who rules over the gods, who rules over the people who need the, you know, the visions to get the power. They came down and were like, yo, dragons rule this place. That's cool. I'm the captain now. And then pulled an opposite of how to train your dragon and then like took out all of the dragons and then took their power and put it in a little chess piece. And then each god has a chess piece. So each god can use this power without a vision and they have a little chess piece power. Okay, great. Awesome. So we get to the First Nation, which is like the nation of wind. So, and then the gods are called archons. So we like meet the Animo archon like in the woods and he's talking to this dragon and this dragon gets spooked and then flies away. It turns out the dragon is like super sick. It's got this like abyssal corruption thing. And like our main character again cannot find their sibling. We don't even get a last name, but it turns out they can purify this dragon's corrupted tears, which is like really cool, but like, no, then we're not going to go back to that for like 4 more nations. So then it turns out also they can also use this elemental ability without the metals, right? Because like, so basically you have the gods that can use these elemental abilities. You have the people with the metal visions, you know, and like they get the power from the gods. And there's like a couple of other exceptions of people who can like use elemental ability like without needing the visions. And then it turns out we're just like our own special one. We just need to like touch a statue and it's like, oh, you can use this power. Great. So then basically the sick dragon gets cured and we're like, oh yeah, that's great. Then this like icy hot Fatui mommy shows up and punts the Animo archon like a football and is like, hey, your chess piece is mine now. So we're like, oh my God, what do we do? And he's like, oh, you got to go to the next nation and talk to the next god. So we're like, okay, so we get to this next nation, which is the nation of rocks, right? And then, but it turns out it's like super advanced. And like, there's also like the god is also the god of contracts. So it's like really advanced, but like rocks basically. So we're like, yo, where's this rock god? And they're like, oh, the rock god is like a dragon. He's going to show up. Not the dragon in the beginning that like the primordial one like took out. He's another type of dragon called an adeptus. And they're like, have their own ability. Any hoozles. So we're like, let's go see this like dragon rock contract god. And then they're like, cool. And then, you know, this dragon carcass falls from the sky and just like lays in the town square for like half the quest. They like don't clean it up. And then they're like, oh my God, the god of rocks is dead. And then they're like, you're new, you did it. And then we didn't do nothing. So then we try to run away. And then this guy shows up and he's like, hey girly, or buddy, depending on which one you choose, hold still. And then like he protects us. So we're like, thank you, we're friends. And he's like, yeah, but I should tell you, remember that chick that punted the Animo archon? Yeah, so we're in the same organization. So we're like, not sure if we trust you, but we need your help. So we're just going to work with you. So then it turns out that, you know, like we're trying to find the gnosis. Remember the little chess piece that chick took? Because, you know, it's the only thing we have left apparently of the Shio god now, right? So then they're like, oh, like the gnosis is like in this thing, that's in this thing. So then we go there and then, you know, our, you know, buddy, the guy who like saved us, he's like, oh, guess what? I'm going to betray you because I'm going to take the gnosis. So we fight him and then it turns out that the gnosis is a fake. And then it turns out that this guy that we talked to that like knew a lot about Liyue's history that works for a funeral parlor. Yeah, he's actually the god of Geo and he like faked his death because he's ready to retire, but he can still work in a funeral parlor. Anyway, Icy Hot Fatui mommy shows up again and he like made a contract with her because obviously god of contracts and then just hands over the gnosis. So we're like, okay, what am I supposed to do with that? And he's like, oh, guess what? Next nation. So we go to the next nation, which is like at the edge of the ocean, and it's like really hard because like the nation has its borders closed, so like people can't like come and go as they please. And remember the little like metals, the visions that like you get the elemental power from? Yeah, the archon of this land is Electro, so she's the Electro god. She's like, yeah, you don't get those no more. So she's like taking those away from her people. They're all trapped. It's really sad, but like it's kind of understandable because like she wasn't supposed to be the god of this land. The god of the land was supposed to be her sister, but then like her sister bit it during this war when like all this stuff happened with Khaenri'ah. Don't worry, we'll get there. And so now she has to be this god. And obviously she's not handling it really well. So she's like, I'm going to go live in my mind and I'm going to make a puppet. And the puppet is going to rule over this land as a god. Turns out it's actually the second puppet that she made, but don't worry, we'll get there. So we go to, try and fight this chick inside of her mind. And then Icy Fatui Mommy shows up again. She's like, I'm going 3 for 3. Give me the gnosis. And then, but it turns out the electro chick, she's like, guess what? My trauma's worse than your trauma. And turns her to ashes. Yo, like R.I.P. So then she's like, oh, guess what? Thank you for helping me heal my trauma. But I don't have the gnosis. So I gave it to my foxy girlfriend, pun intended. So we go to the foxy girlfriend. We're like, yo, where's the gnosis? And she's like, oh, I handed it over to the Fatui, which is the organization of Icy Hot Mommy. And then, the guy, the hey buddy guy. And it's like, I handed it over to them, for your protection. So we're like, great, what am I supposed to do with this? So then it turns out that the gnosis was actually given to this guy who was the first puppet this electro chick made. He's like kind of her son, but then kind of not her son. He's got all this trauma. Any hoozles. He's also in this organization. And he's like, yo, I got the gnosis now. And like, he was originally made to house this thing. So like the electro chick was like, I don't want this power. I'm going to put it inside this puppet and like, you're going to rule. And then, but he was like the prototype puppet. And then he had like too much emotion. And she was like, yo, like, I don't want to do this to you. So she abandoned him. He has a whole tragic backstory. Anyway, so he has the gnosis. And then he's like, yo, I'm gonna become a god. And we're like, yo, it doesn't work that way. Like the gods are already. And he's like, nah, it doesn't matter. So then we go to the next nation, which is the nation of Dendro, like plants and vines and outside and all that stuff, right? So we get there and then we're like, yo, where's the god? And then they're like, oh, we got 2 gods. We got Greater Lord Rukutavata and Lesser Lord Kusanali, right? So then we go and then we meet this shit. She's so cute. She's like this little baby. But then don't get rushed. She's powerful. So then remember that puppet guy? Yeah. So like he tries to become a god. So then we have to fight him. And then, the little plant baby, like with her, we defeat him, right? But then all this stuff happens. And then it turns out that like all of the memories and history of this nation, it's in a freaking tree. But then all the memories in this tree can like get, that you could erase them. So then puppet guy is like, oh, I don't want to exist anymore. I'm going to just erase myself from this tree. And we're like, wait, go back. What do you mean the memories are in the tree? And then she's like, oh, I really can't tell you that much about it. So then naturally, a member of the Fatui has to show up because puppet guy, he was also in the Fatui, but he's down for the count. He's, going to explore himself now because he's been erased. So this other guy shows up. He likes to experiment on orphans, but that's a whole other thing. And he's like, yo, give me the gnosis. Because remember, so like the guy, the little chess piece, puppet guy had it, but then like we took it from him. So now Dendro chick, she got 2 of them, right? So she's like, all right, I'm negotiating. And then the guy that she's talking to, he's like uber powerful and like we've been over this experimenting on orphans, right? So then she's like, listen, I'll hand over both of these to you, but like you have to delete the other segments you have of yourself, because experimenting on orphan doctor guy, he can like create different versions of himself at different ages. And so they've just been all around Teyvat spying on people. So she's like, I'll hand these over, but you got to get rid of all your other versions and you got to promise not to make any more. So he's like, done. And then we have a net and she hands over not 1 but 2. And I'm like, bro, why are we even doing this at this point? Okay, we are 0 for 4. So then she's like, oh, guess what? Next nation, right? So when we go to the next nation, it's the nation of like water. And by water, I mean like half the nation actually underwater, but it's also the nation of justice. And then we get there and the god there, she very eccentric, she's like, it's not just a courtroom, it's a stage, right? So when we get there and then it turns out that remember how I told you the land was originally ruled by dragons? Yo, one of the we meet a dragon. Like he's not the OG dragon, but he is a dragon, right? But we don't know he's a dragon. Anyway, so we get there, and people dissolving into water. There are trials. It is one of the most out-of-pocket places ever, right? But then we're like, oh, the hydro archon, the chick that rules over this place, she kind of sus. So, what are we going to do, right? So we go on this undercover mission in the prison. Yes, this nation that is underwater, that has people dissolving, also has a prison. That's actually surprisingly wonderful, and people, choose to live there. Anyway, we go under, we try to get all this information, and we're like, yo, she defo lying about something. So what do these people do? Put this woman on trial. They literally put their own god on trial and give her the death penalty. And I'm like, yo, this nation is crazy. And then, but here's the thing, okay? So it's a nation of justice. So then, people vote on, give you a verdict if it's guilty or not guilty. But it turns out that's, not even, a real verdict, because the real verdict comes from this, justice machine. So justice machine is like, oh, guess what? The hydro archon, she gonna bite it. And then it turns out that the chick that we thought was the hydro god wasn't actually the hydro god. And then the actual hydro god comes back and was like, yo, I was trying to fool everybody. And then gets taken out by the giant machine. But then there's this whole prophecy where, everyone in this nation is gonna drown, right? So, all this stuff happens. Basically, we fixed the prophecy. Nobody really drowns except for these 2 NPCs that were with this girl, Navi. It was no one's really over that, right? So we fixed this, and then the gnosis in this respect goes to the dragon, right? Because, so we had the actual god, but she's not the god no more. And then the chick that was pretending to be the god, she wasn't actually a god. She didn't even have any ability. She was a person. But then she got a vision after, so she does have abilities now. Anyway, so then the dragon now has the gnosis, and we're like, perfect, finally, so we can finally get one. He's like, oh, well, I'm a dragon. I have no need to the gnosis. So what does he do? Hands it over. Great. So then we still don't have gnosis. But he's like, it's okay though, because the power of Hydro was given back to me. So like, there was a positive aspect of this. So then we're like, okay, what do we do now? And then he's like, okay, well, turns out, so you know these little chess pieces? Yeah, turns out they're the remains of this thing called like a descender. And we're like, what? That's interesting. And we're like, it's remains? And he's like, yeah, it turns out you're a descender. So, okay, so the gnosis are made from the remains of people that were like us before. Remember the primordial one that took out all the dragons and stuff I was talking about that's like rules over the gods and rules over the people? Turns out they were also a descender, and there's been like 3 other ones. We're not even close to the first people that have done this. And I should have mentioned, like, back when we were in the nation of plants, they told us that there are these things called Samsara cycles, and then there's like all these cycles of life, death, and rebirth, and there's been 4 of them. We're the 4th descender. Anyway, so we finish up in this whack-ass nation where people are, like, getting dissolved, and people are getting put on trial, and machines are turning into giant swords. And then they're like, oh, so you gotta go to this next nation. Right? So we have no gnosis. Nothing. They've all been going to the Fatui, who's run by this shit called the Saritsa, who, get this, is a god in another nation. That's right. One of the gods is taking all the gnosis from the other gods, like through this organization of people. Anyway, so like, you gotta go to the next nation. So we go to this next nation. This is the nation that we're in right now. And we're like, oh, what could go wrong? It's a nation of war. Literally a nation of war. It's a pyro archon, but she's like nation of war. And then, but this one is different because all the other gods, like, they were kind of like appointed during this war, but then she's like, nah, like, you have to fight and you gotta earn that title in this nation. You want to talk about out of pocket? Like, I thought the water nation was crazy. This nation, people literally bite it and then get resurrected. Like, you literally just. So anywho, we're going through this nation. All this other stuff happens. Turns out the sky is fake. The abyss is overrunning people. We're still trying to learn about our stuff. And then, yeah, so we're gonna finish up in this nation. Then we're gonna go to this place called Nodcry, which is like, oh, so you've been to all these nations where these guys. Now you got this like lawless place where like you don't know what's gonna happen. Then of course we got to go to the nation of the chick that's trying to take all this gnosis. And then when all this stuff happens, then we got to go to this nation that used to exist, but it don't exist no more. Because it turns out way back in the day, there was this nation that was like, oh, you know how y'all have like gods and elemental abilities? We don't want none of that. So we're gonna have a nation where there's like no abilities and no gods. And then it turns out there might actually be another element in the people in all this nation. Then there was like this thing 500 years ago, and then there was this war. And then all those people, like half of them became hilichurls, some of them are immortal, and then some of them we've seen, like R.I.P., Capital, and like all this stuff's happening. So basically the point of this game is that, you're this person, you can resonate with any ability that you want, and you can build these parties in this gosh game, so you're trying to like get all these other characters. So the whole point of it is like you're actually trying to find your sibling, which you basically forget in like all the craziness that happens. Like I honestly forget. And so now you're, trying to find the sibling, trying to figure out what's going on, trying to get a gnosis, any gnosis if you can, and yeah, basically covers it. I, just meant, like, is it fun? Do you enjoy playing it? Playing Genshin is kind of like going to the gym, where it's like you're kind of dreading it before it starts because you're like, oh, this is probably going to hurt and it's not, I don't know. And then during it, you're like, oh my God, this definitely hurts and this is pain, this is crazy. What is happening? And then after it's over, you're like, oh, you know what? That wasn't so bad. I'm going to go do it again. I'm just going to download it and find out for myself.